Hello and welcome to Chapter 16, Section 5, Part 2, The Way to Victory. Yesterday we finished talking about the Gettysburg Address. Um, one thing that always strikes me about the Gettysburg Address is that Lincoln said that people wouldn't remember what he said there, but everyone remembers it. Like I said, it's one of the most famous speeches in history, and it just shows Lincoln's humility, how important that is. Um, so anyway, let's go on and see the final phase of the war. Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, they were able to win an important victory in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This continues to further weaken the Confederates after Gettysburg and Vicksburg. If you remember William Sherman, he was one of the only generals who predicted a very long war, and so that's another win for Grant. Grant really had very few losses in the West, and that's going to prompt Lincoln to name Ulysses S. Grant the commander of the entire Union Army. And they really don't need the army, too much of the army out west anymore, because that's well under control. And so Grant is going to take his on brand winning ways to the east. So Grant puts together a plan to destroy the South, and he is going to do that with the help of General Sherman. So the Army of the Potomac is going to destroy Lee in Virginia, and Sherman is going to crush them in the west and in the south in his famous march to the sea. Um, Sherman basically burns down Atlanta and then destroys everything from Atlanta to Savannah, everything in his wake. He just ransacks homes, and his entire army just destroys this. It's just a total path of destruction, which we'll get to. So 115,000 Union soldiers defeat Lee's army of 64,000 in the South. The North loses thousands of men, but remember, they have a bigger population, so they just keep refilling. They pull off 3 victories in a row. Grant then leads a 9-month attack in Petersburg, Virginia. This is just outside of Richmond, because he is trying to close off Richmond from the rest of the Confederacy since it is their capital. Now, in between all of these battles and the war, the Civil War, Lincoln has to face a re-election. Yeah, the election of 1864. People were really, really getting tired of the war. They were discussing the idea of peace, and Northern Democrats were really pushing for peace, even if it meant a Confederate win, a Confederate independence. But Lincoln didn't want to hear about that. He was all about restoring the Union. But right before the election, Sherman captures Atlanta. Admiral Farragut, we talked about him earlier. He won a battle in New Orleans. He takes control of Mobile, Alabama, and the Confederates were being driven out of Virginia. So the writing was on the wall. The South was on the way to its defeat, and Lincoln is reelected, which is a really good thing because um, he's going to help finish the war. So let's talk about Sherman's march from Atlanta to Savannah. This is known as total war. He leaves all towns in just total destruction. Again, it's called total war. Grant took a lot of heat for letting Sherman do this. It was a plan that he had kind of like he had created in his mind about just destroying everything he could get his hands on. And he does this. He literally leaves a path of destruction. So, while this is happening, Robert E. Lee is trying to hold on to Petersburg, Virginia until April of 1865, but he has to withdraw. And on April 2nd, 1865, Richmond finally falls to the Union. Lee tries to escape and to go and stop Sherman, but the Union kind of blocks his escape. And at this point, he knows that it's over. Also, on April 9th, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in a place called Appomattox Courthouse. Um, it was a town called Appomattox Courthouse. It wasn't just a courthouse. So this was very ceremonial, um, you know, with a giving of swords, and there was a process. And Lee and Grant, they knew each other from their days at West Point, and Grant was very gracious. He said that the South had to put their guns down, but he let the soldiers go home. Um, they gave him their horses. He gave all the soldiers 3 days worth of food, and he just said, "Go home." Now, eventually, Jefferson Davis is captured on May 10th. Remember him? He was the president of the Confederacy. Um, it's said that he was captured down south in Texas trying to cross the border into Mexico and that he was wearing women's clothing. Now, sounds like he was in disguise trying to run away. Um, but either way, he is captured. So, how about some outcomes? Let's finish off here with some outcomes of the war. Now, one, it is one of the most devastating conflicts in American history. You're talking over 600,000 soldiers died. So that's pretty devastating. Um, Two, billions of dollars in debt. The U.S. will go through a period of time trying to recover. And remember, all of the damage was all American damage since it's a civil war. Three, um, it left a lot of bitter feelings between the North and the South. And you could say that some of those bitter feelings still exist today. There's a lot of, you know, kind of like built up animosity between North and South still to this day. But four, a Union victory saved the United States as a whole. Um, the fifth outcome is that the federal government will forever be more powerful than the states. And the sixth and probably, most important outcome is that the African Americans that were slaves were all going to be freed with the passing of the 13th Amendment. This ends our chapter about the Civil War. Chapter 17 will be about Lincoln's assassination and the rebuilding of the South and how the U.S. will manage to go on after a civil war. It's all about Reconstruction. So um, we'll talk about that next, chapter 17. Bye bye.